The following podcast is brought to you by the Arthur Miller Society. Please visit us at arthurmillersociety.net for more information.
That is a $1 million idea.
They have soul, and people want to be part of something that has soul.
Hi, welcome to the Arthur Miller Society podcast. From Jaipur, India, my name is Ambika Singh.
And from Dublin, Ireland, I'm Kieran Leinster. Ambika, it's great to talk to you. It's been far too long since we've done this. How have you been?
I've been good, Kieran. Been busy with work and family mostly. I think I recorded my last episode on this podcast with you when India was suffering in the aftermath of the COVID-19 second wave. And I'm glad it's better now. Things are improving and people are vaccinated and we are no longer in the lockdown mode that we were at that point of time. And good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been opening kind of slowly, progressively since the start of the summer. We're mostly vaccinated now. I'm back on campus teaching. We're talking today about Irishness in the work of Eugene O'Neill. So it's kind of, good to start feeling normal and getting back to real life. And it's obviously great to get back podcasting with you.
Yep, happy podcasting again with you, Kieran.
Absolutely. And to start us off with the new semester, we were joined by Professor Anne C. Hall to talk about the relationship between Arthur Miller and Harold Pinter and how this relationship took in their personalities, plays, and politics.
Anne C. Hall is currently a professor at the University of Louisville, where she teaches drama, film, and comparative humanities. She is president of the International Harold Pinter Society and the editor of the Harold Pinter Review. Her publications include A Kind of Alaska, Women in the Plays of O'Neill, Pinter, and Shepard and Phantom Variations, the adaptations of Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera. She has edited 2 essay collections and co-edited 2 more. She's a theatre series editor for Palgrave Macmillan and is currently co-editing Dramatic Apparitions and Theatrical Ghosts. She hopes to complete her manuscript, Art Has a Lot to Answer For, The Art and Life of Ronald Harwood, next year.
Unfortunately, we had a couple of very minor connection issues throughout the interview, but it's Zoom's fault and, it can't really be avoided. And we began by asking if we should find the close friendship that developed between Miller and Pinter somewhat surprising, and then how it developed. We began by asking if we should find the close friendship between Miller and Pinter somewhat surprising, and then how it developed over the years.
I do think they are an odd couple, and I think this question is a great question. They met through International Pen. Arthur Miller was going to Turkey, and Turkey was abusing Kurdish authors and the Kurds in general, and he invited Pinter along. And Pinter, at this time, I'm trying to remember when this was.
85, I think.
1985. This is a big moment for Pinter. He's gotten out of a bad marriage. He's been having an affair with Lady Antonia Fraser, and he's becoming more politically aware or explicit because of Lady Antonia's activism, and her whole life was that was her milieu. Her father was in politics. She married someone in politics. So this was part of her world, and he comes into that world. And I think he gets really inspired, and he goes to Turkey with Arthur Miller, and they do hit it off. There's a very funny story. It's on the haroldpinter.org website. They get to Turkey, and one of Pinter's bags is lost, and so he doesn't have any socks, and he has to borrow Arthur Miller's socks. And he says they're really nice socks, and they're made to last, and just really, really mundane and domestic things that seem to bring them together. But what I think solidified the relationship was they are invited to a dinner at the ambassador's house, the U.S. ambassador's house. And this is a typical, diplomatic thing. We have this great American playwright coming to, an embassy in another country. We want to show off our artists, our, great people. And so Arthur Miller brings, Harold Pinter along, and they suddenly start arguing about how these artists are being treated. These writers are being tortured. They're being censored. They're being, it's just awful what's happening. And Miller, doesn't pull any punches and says, how can you be a democracy? How can the US be a democracy and support this dictatorship and this kind of treatment? Well, that doesn't go too well, but dinner goes on, and suddenly Pinter's off by himself looking at some paintings, and some of the diplomats come, and including the US ambassador, come and talk to him about it. It's like, how can you do this? How can you say this? And Pinter's like, well, it's because you're electrifying people's genitals because they're speaking out against you. This is cruel and unusual. Well, the ambassador says, this is my house, blah, blah, blah. And they basically either get kicked out or storm out or both. And the best part of this story is, they have this moral indignation. They're leaving this US embassy. They've made their point. They leave. They don't have a cab. They don't know how to get back to their hotel, but they manage to get back. But I think that story, I was thinking about this question. I think that this story really illustrates what brings them together. They're both truth tellers. They're both BS detectors. They both have lived through totalitarian regimes. They've seen the Holocaust. They've seen Stalin, and they know what's at stake in some of these minor things that many of us will ignore. Oh, this guy's just a kook. This guy's just, not even sane. And we try to dismiss them, but I think Miller and Pinter knew the signs. And so both of them felt it their moral obligation to speak out and speak up. And though Pinter says he wasn't political, I mean, he was. He was a conscientious objector when he was young. And I think I've been reading about, the theater of the absurd and Martin Eslin's book, and rethinking that in terms of Václav Havel. And I think that what I'm seeing in some of the absurdists in the early days when they began, I think they were just sick of politics and didn't want to be associated with it in any way, because look what it did. I mean, it killed, 6 million Jews and, homosexuals and gypsies and innocents, et cetera. So look what it did. And I think there was an attempt to distance themselves from it. And then the further they get away from it, I think they realize, no, we have to be involved. We have to have this moral voice and use our platforms to make statements. And they're very effective at making these statements. Both of them are great essayists and speechwriters and, takers to task. They will take people to task. So I think that as they developed their political views, they became closer. I know I had the great fortune to see Harold Pinter in One for the Road and Arthur Miller speaking about how important Harold Pinter was at the Lincoln Center celebration in August, right before September 11th happened in New York City. And it's just been a surreal memory for me to have been with Pinter and Miller and their criticism of the United States, and the play that Pinter chose to perform in front of the US audience was One for the Road, his most brutal, piece, I think, on torture and oppression and totalitarianism. And to see that, and then, a month later, not even a month later, 3 weeks later, we have the September 11th attacks. So, that's, I think, what brought them together is this sense that somebody's got to say something, and we're going to do it, and they feel compelled to do it. Both of them, too, were very good at educating people about art. Miller writes Tragedy in the Common Man. It's like, hey, we're going to rethink Aristotle. And I don't care if you agree with me or not, we're going to rethink this. And he's got a couple other essays that I can't off the top of my head remember, but it's like he does seem to be on a mission to educate people on art and his art. And Pinter does as well. Early on, he tries to educate people that we don't have to have a motive to have a good play. We don't have to know everything about the character to have a good play. So I think they are kindred spirits. And I could go on, but I'm going to stop right now.
No, that's a great answer. And I love just the prospect of yeah, being in the room with Pinter and Miller sort of performing and talking about their work, it's kind of one of those
it
all-star lineups.
Unbelievable. Harry Burton was there. Who was it? Mel Gussow was there. There was someone else, but it was just Stanley Tucci was there. It was just an amazing event. And I'm trying to think, they did the homecoming, and I can't remember who played Max, but it was just delightful. Anyway, just a memorable event. And I wish they had recorded it because it was just amazing.
Well, BS detectors and best friends, I'm so happy with your elaborate answer. And we were like, Kieran and I were both hoping that, you mentioned the socks because,
yes.
yeah.
It's a great
and we kind of knew also that you would. So,
yeah, I love it. It's very much a sort of, I always feel it's Pinter leading Miller astray. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll leave. Cool. You're my buddy.
They both like the specific, they really both get into the specific. I was laughing because there's a little group who are talking about Pinter, and someone found an educational version, like a student version of the birthday party. And in the student version, they have a glossary of terms used in the birthday party for non-British or young people, and so, what are chips? They're French fries, blah, 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 and I remember working on The Dumbwaiter. I was the dramaturg for a production on The Dumbwaiter, and none of us had any idea what Eccles cakes were. I mean, they just go crazy over Eccles cake. So I looked it up, I found it, I gave a definition, but then this was another highlight of my life. I went to Canada to see a play at the Shaw Festival, and they had Eccles cakes in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Canada. So I was able to purchase and eat an Eccles cake. But I think all of them are. I think both of them are really interested in that tangible detail that's going to connect us to things. Broken glass, the tube in, Death of a Salesman, just these details, the football, the basketballs, just to help us connect. So I love that story because it's helping the two of them connect too.
And can you then talk a little bit more about their influence on each other as writers and where we see it in the plays? So I always think some of Miller's plays of the 80s, Archbishop Ceiling, Elegy for a Lady, have a hint of Pinter about them. But can we see the influence working the other way?
Oh, Miller influencing Pinter? I don't think. I just taught Eugene O'Neill, and there's no way you can get around American drama without bumping into Eugene O'Neill. I mean, he's just this mountain. And I feel the same way with Arthur Miller in modern drama. I just, whether or not Pinter did see an early production of Death of a Salesman. He went with his parents, and he mentioned that it had a large Jewish audience. And I know, we can get into their Jewishness in a little bit, but I just think Death of a Salesman is just this. I mean, it's just, you cannot ignore it in modern drama. So, of course, I think it's going to influence Harold Pinter. I think Pinter came from a working class background, and to see that represented in Willie Loman. One of Pinter's friends, Ronald Harwood, said when he saw and heard about A Death of a Salesman, I mean, he just connected with it because his father was a failed salesman too. So I think there's just no way, whether it's conscious or not, it's in the air. I mean, Arthur Miller is a force to be reckoned with. And I think that, I know that people tend to split Miller and Pinter into absurdist, Pinter being absurd and Miller being realist, but I don't think that's really accurate. I think they both are working in a vision that maybe does both of those things, that takes parts from realism to, that's tangential or that tactile stuff, but also has dream qualities. irrational qualities, intersectionality qualities that wouldn't normally happen in a kitchen sink drama, So I think they're not as different, but, I think I'm trying to remember when Miller decides probably earlier than Pinter to tackle the Holocaust. And I think Pinter then takes him a while, but then he starts tackling the Holocaust in Ashes to Ashes. And, I think in other, in his more political plays, those could very easily be, set in Nazi Germany. It's about power. It's about the abuse of power. But I think the specific references to the Holocaust might be thanks to Miller, because, Miller starts writing about this because in some ways people are forgetting about it. They're not talking about it. It's not being taught in schools. I mean, it's remarkable to see, but there was just this sense like, we don't even want to think about it. It was so atrocious, so awful. We don't want to think about it. And then this movement happens. We've got to talk about this. We've got to represent this so it won't happen again. And I think Miller gets on it earlier than Pinter. So maybe there's some influence there. Ashes to Ashes is a brilliant, brilliant piece. And I think it's very, very similar to Broken Glass, where time just morphs and bends because, to show that we're capable of this all the time. Doesn't matter where we are, if we're in New York or Brooklyn, if we're in contemporary times, we are all capable of this. So, yeah. So, I think I would have to do a more careful study to see more, but I do want to do something on their representation of time, because I think it's really, really interesting. Both of them do, sort of stretch it in a very, Einsteinian way. We have a kind of Alaska, where a woman's been in a coma, for 25 years. We have, this Broken Glass situation. We have Time Bends, Miller's book. And I do want to investigate that more, because I think there's something there. And whether it's because of modernity or their experiences with oppression or what, but it's there. I think they're both working something out with the concept of time.
You have kind of, partially answered my next question, but I'll still ask. The theater director, Melia Benisusan, said that the challenge for Jewish American playwrights since the 50s, when Jews became white, is negotiating the rift between a marginalized past but a theoretically assimilated present. Do you think this shared cultural heritage influenced Miller and Pinter to appreciate one another as writers and as people? Because, like you say, they both confronted the same issues and spoke about the Holocaust because they wanted people to understand that this is not the past. This can also be the future. And this is very much the present in some ways.
Yeah, I think both of them, got into trouble with the Jewish community. I have a good friend who does Jewish theater, and he's very knowledgeable. His name is David Schock, and he teaches at DePaul University. And I said, why don't you do any Pinter? And he's like, what has he ever said about Jewish theater and stuff? And even Lady Antonia just wrote a book about their trip to Israel. And I think she was, she's a devout Catholic, and went to some of the Catholic Christian sites and had an experience there, and was maybe hoping that happened with Pinter. No, it's like, oh, this was amazing, blah blah blah. But it didn't have this, oh, I'm Jewish moment. So, and I think Miller's the same way. I think they have a very respectful attitude towards their Jewish heritage. And I don't think they'd be who they are without their Jewish heritage. Their humor, I think, comes from their Jewish heritage, that sort of, I don't know, just a darkly comic, ironic sense and satire. But I also think their sense of moral outrage and moral purpose come from that. But I think they're reluctant to over-identify there because they are negotiating their own voice. and trying to get their own perspective. And I think as artists, this, I think this happens with Irish and, Indian writers too. It's like, on the one hand, you want to be identified with your heritage, but on the other hand, you don't want to be marginalized either, or I don't know. I haven't thought it out exactly, but as writers anyway, we're always, and I include you too, because you're both writers, we're always on the margins looking in and observing. And that's why we're writers. We're writers because we have that ability to kind of look objectively at something. And so I think that position, sort of irritated some people who really wanted them to be more pro-Israel and pro-Jewish. Both of them get into trouble over Palestinian matters. Miller gets in trouble over the film with Vanessa Redgrave playing for Time. And then Pinter gets into trouble because of some statement he makes. And, he's supportive of this piece called, where is it? Oh, it's about a young girl who goes to Israel to help the Palestinians. And she's, what is it, Rachel? Anyway, he gets into trouble for being sort of supportive of Palestinians. I think their Jewish heritage is who they are, but I think it was a challenge for them to negotiate at times.
Is that My Name is Rachel Curry? Was that the piece?
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rachel Curry. Pinter basically said, hey, you're the New York Theater canceled its production because of some pressure, and Pinter thought that they were self-censoring and not being courageous enough, and so he got in trouble for that.
It's funny actually when you mention, I can't speak to the Indian version, but Miller himself said that his relationship with Jews was a bit like what he thought of Joyce and the Irish, that they really can't live with them and can't live without them, that there's just something that's almost intractable, that's pulling him back always, which is, I think it's a really apt and really insightful comment on Joyce and Irishness in particular.
I love it. I think that's exactly what's going on. Yeah. It's
fantastic. And just the fact that, Joyce literally got away, but mentally couldn't, is very indicative, I think, of a lot of what happened with Miller. But kind of talking about this, it was put to him in the early 70s that there was a growing Jewish awareness in his plays, and Miller denied it. And I just wonder what you think of this idea of a growing awareness and also his denial.
Well, I think that, there's, again, this trend to address, the Holocaust, Jewish identity, Jewish otherness, and, let's deal with this. And I think, again, maybe it is this resistance to pinning things down that both of them had, especially in their art. I think, Pinter has the great Nobel Prize speech that says, we have language in art and language in politics. And language in art is always suggestive and never direct. It's indirect. Plays will always be confusing, I think he says, or mysterious. And that's the way they should be. And that's the way art should be, because that's what engages us, is that mystery. And we continue to return to them to solve the riddle. But in politics is another story. And he says that there's a political language we must use. So maybe Miller was thinking about that. And, maybe he wanted to distance himself from trends in Judaism that maybe he didn't support. I don't know about you. I'm a practicing Catholic, but I don't support everything. And it would be really boring to have to say, well, yeah, I'm Catholic and I'm a Catholic writer, but I don't, I don't believe in all these 45 other things, So maybe it was just easier to say, no, I'm not that way, and just move on. But I have no idea. Yeah, I was looking at, the great Christopher Bigsby's, biography on Miller, and just looked up, his later comments, and it's like, nope, I'm not a Jewish author, And part of that could be anti-Semitism. You identify as a Jewish author. Are you produced as much? That's kind of terrible to think, but I don't think he was thinking that way. I think he was thinking more as an artist.
I think I kind of understand, like, I don't know, I cannot be in his socks in any way because
Getting back to socks.
But the whole point is that I was born Hindu and I am Hindu in a way. My cultural heritage is that, but am I a practicing Hindu? I'm not. So I may believe in certain tenets of my religion and my cultural heritage, but if I become a writer, if I see that people are blaming me for not being Hindu enough, that would be too much of a burden. I don't think I would like to take it forward and be over identified as one, to be blamed for not doing justice.
I think
I don't think it would make much sense to me.
Right. They both resist categorizing. Both, I think it drove Pinter crazy to hear him described as, Pinteresque language and comedy of menace, and try to, sort of pin, and I think he really enjoyed that moment in the late 80s when he said, I said all my plays weren't political, they were apolitical, but I lied, they were all political. I think he really enjoyed doing that, sort of turning it upside down. And I don't blame them, because it's like a performer or an actor. You don't want to get typecast. You want to be able to experiment with different forms and different ideas and not have to do it a certain way all the time. The creative writer, and then I've been thinking about a lot about totalitarianism and post-totalitarianism. Václav Havel has an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And he talks about how totalitarianism, is allowed because people don't want to have to struggle with diversity and difference and the meaning of life and finding it out for yourself. They want to have 1, 2, 3, and then we're done. And that's the comfort that totalitarianism gives, but that's also the prison that it creates. Yeah. And I wonder if that isn't something within the two of them as well, to let people experience them without a lens, without the lens of religion.
Yeah, I think they were both people who had a cultural heritage, of course, like everyone else. Like it was not specific or special of them that they had a cultural heritage, but people's expectations of them, and then if they ever identified and brought it to the forefront, their criticism, that was, I think, just too unfair. And it would be unfair to any artist, any creative person.
Absolutely.
In this, yeah.
I think I was going to say that ambiguity, especially around Willy Loman, the classic, is he Jewish, is he not? Well, the thing is, he can be Jewish, or he can be, like in the Young Vic production, it can be a black family, or it can be anything. You could do it Irish, Death of a Salesman. So I think the fact that they're allowing that ambiguity just makes the plays a bit more rich and a bit more able to be performed in as many different places as possible.
Yeah, leaving it a lot to what to interpretation, not saying exactly how it's going to be done. So that's what makes the two of them creative and and also timeless in a way, that we are able to Absolutely. Talk about them much after they are gone. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure every person who produces their plays also feels the same way, that there is a lot of scope for interpretation. In the same interview with the New York Times, Miller made it clear that he was a devotee of Pinter. What was it about his plays that appealed to Miller at that time, before we could see real influence of Pinter on his work? I don't really know how many people even notice that influence, but since we are talking about it, and I know you do see that.
Yeah, I think Pinter was just such a breath of fresh air in terms of this absurd perspective. I mean, it wasn't a movement. But you have this group of people sort of writing these very similar plays that don't answer questions in the way that well-made plays do. And you have somebody like Beckett that's just so abstract. I mean, it's just so out there. It's like abstract art or abstract film, but with Pinter, he sets it in this domestic background. And I think that would appeal to Miller, because Miller sets his plays in a domestic, a very relatable place. It doesn't have to be a realistic place, but it's some place that we can relate to: a family living room, a family kitchen, a home in Brooklyn. And I think that makes this idea of the absurd for me more powerful. With Beckett, it's almost intellectual, and I love Beckett, and I think he's really unbelievable, just revolutionized theater forever. But I think with setting it into the domestic, and the mundane, it's almost like planting a bomb in the consciousness of the theater going public. And it's like, wait, she's going to stay with those guys? She's going to leave her husband with a good job at a university and stay with these guys? Or Flora's going to replace her husband with a match seller while they're drinking tea? And I think it really, the juxtaposition of the absurd and the real is just so wonderful and really challenging. And I do think Miller picks up on that and incorporates it into things.
I always love talking to my students about the homecoming, and we say, we don't know what's going on and it's all strange and mysterious, but he tells us it's set in North London. It's that one really bizarre specific point, and it's like, and they're like, I don't know, why would he do this? Let's talk about it. But yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, and it's that bizarre blend of random and very, very specific local.
He says at one point, someone says, this is, and honestly, I've been involved in a more recent production of The Homecoming, and people still are shocked by Ruth's behavior. So even the sexual revolution has not changed the shock of that play with her leaving the marriage and the children. But somebody said, nobody does this, roll around with your husband's brother, boxer brother on the floor and things like that. And he said, oh yeah, it happens every day in London, So,
in London.
It's true. It's true. We want to deny it, but it's true.
That's excellent. I just want to talk then. This is Ben Brantley quote from the Times. He says that Mr. Heffernan, in A Slight Ache, discovers, like so many figures in Pinter's plays and in modern drama, that the absurd is existence itself. It is ultimately so deeply, terrifyingly tragic that you might as well laugh. And do you think this underlying but quite often unnoticed humor in Miller's writing was a way inspired by Pinter, that he kind of picked up on that sense of humor, that he found Pinter's plays funny in a way that maybe a lot of American critics didn't automatically?
Well, I guess I don't know. I think it was Linda Benz V. I think I may have heard a paper or read a paper by her on Jewish humor. And I think it might have been on David Mamet. So I think, I'm trying to remember humorous moments in Death of a Salesman, and I can't remember any. And, but in, Resurrection Blues, there's certainly a lot of really funny stuff going on in there, that's very ironic and satiric. And so, perhaps you're right that, he saw this sardonic sense of humor in Pinter and borrowed from it. Or, I think Miller has it, I don't know. Anybody who's married to Marilyn Monroe for as long as he must have had a sense of humor, I think. But anyway, I'll take it. If you're saying Pinter did it, I'll take it.
I think I'm of the opinion that he already had it. he liked Pinter because he already had it.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Yeah,
wouldn't have seen it otherwise. Yeah.
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 For somebody to like, at least, especially in adulthood, they did not meet as children. So for an adult to like another person, to like another playwright from another country, I'm sure he already had it in himself to appreciate that kind of art. And one thing that of course, that has been a lack for me, because I grew up reading a lot of plays, but I did not watch as many plays because I grew up in a small city. So I read a lot of Pinter plays as a college student. It always made me very curious about how difficult it must be for his actors, making sure that that exceptional reverberation is felt in the theater. It must be very difficult, and it must be, rigorously tiring for them, embodying Pinter's pauses to cause all of that echo there. And whatever little Pinter theater I did attend here, that was more of Hindi translation. So I never got to know as much. But if you have ever experienced that, what kind of exercise it must be for the actors? And do you think there are as many challenges for an actor in a Miller play?
I think both of them are, prizes for actors. Everybody wants to be in a Pinter play. Everybody wants to be in a Miller play because of the depth that you get to explore in those characters and in yourself, and trying to figure out what is going to work and what isn't going to work. I know that Pinter, mentions that comedians like Jack Benny influenced his sort of timing, and the film noir also influenced his sort of dark vision, but also the way they talk and the sort of the thug, sound, the sound of thugs. I think that the people I know who work in Pinter really like it and get into the cadence of it. You think in The Birthday Party, Goldberg and McCain are interrogating Stanley by questioning him, and they're almost like abusing him through questions. And it's just, rapid fire, rapid fire, rapid fire. And some of the lines are so funny. We have two children, and when they were little, we would quote lines from The Homecoming. What should we name the cat? Oh, how about Spanish Jackie? And I mean, these things just stay with you. And I think that I'm not an actress, but I have to say that I have done some Beckett before, and I've done some Pinter before, and I'd much rather do the Pinter than the Beckett, because the Beckett, you're in the ozone. There's nothing to hold on to. Whereas with the Pinter, it's like, okay, this is the scene with the breakfast table. Okay, this is the scene for the party. You at least have something to hold on to. But I'm trying to think of a film that would be great to watch that's great Pinter. What's a great Pinter film that isn't by Pinter, but is by Martin McDonagh, is In Bruges. That if you want to see Pinter language at work, that's a great film. That's a really great film. It's another version of The Dumbwaiter, and you're dying to say something.
No, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I was really snobby. My brother put that on one evening. I was back home and we were hanging out, and he said, "Yeah, I like McDonagh. He's funny and he's violent. It'd be great." And within 2 minutes, I said, "No, I've already seen this. Like, it's The Dumbwaiter. No, come on, you have to be a bit more." So I've actually never watched it to the end. I watched the first 5 minutes and left the room because I was just frustrated and snobby. So it's worth watching.
Yeah, I think so. It's just hard to find good Pinter on film. The Homecoming with Vivian Merchant, that's a great version. It's just sometimes hard to find. And then, there's a couple No Man's Lands out there. Oh, another version, another great film is The Servant, with what's his first name? Losey is the director. Pinter wrote the screenplay. it's a terrific film about the, sort of the domestication of menace. It's about a young, it's from the 60s, young, up and coming British young man, going to be establishing his home. He's very wealthy, well off, and he hires a butler or servant, and it's Dirk Bogarde, and all these weird things start happening. It's just tremendous. So those, I'm just thinking of ease of access. Those will be easier to find than a really good production of, A Kind of Alaska. I wish there was a film version of that, but there isn't. So. But the people I know who do Pinter really love him, and the people I know who do Miller really love him. I mean, I think they have soul, and people want to be part of something that has soul.
I always find it fun doing when we do the homecoming, and I just show the students the glass of water scene with from the one you mentioned with Ian Holm as Lenny.
Yeah.
Because that scene makes no sense on paper, and then you see it on the screen, and it's absolutely terrifying. And you're like, wow, I didn't know what I was reading until I saw it. It's
absolutely,
it's a great version. And another thing that they had in common is that their plays, especially their later plays, are informed to a large degree by their non-fiction statements, interviews, essays, speeches. We've kind of touched on this, but what do you think was the main motivation for this approach from the pair of them? And do you think it might have stemmed from experiences of being misconstrued for their plays, for their creative work?
Well, I know both of them used, public events to make a point. I think they saw how valuable that was, and that this is an opportunity that they have to make the most of. And so I do think, and that's smart. I think the things that motivate their essays are the things that motivate their plays. They're moral, but they're not moralists. They tempt us in their plays to think about things. And then maybe in their essays, they really are able to, just say it, get the point across. And that, again, that's the difference between that political and artistic language. But, both of them, I love them both because they really defend the arts. And in the United States, the arts and humanities are under attack. What can you do with an art degree? What can you do with a humanities degree? And both of them really show us that with the arts, we learn how to, contemplate the meaning of life. And with the arts, honestly, what Miller says at the end of his speech on art and politics, he says something like, if you don't have an artist, you lose the past. No matter how great you are, if you don't have an artist memorializing this, you're gone. You're toast. And so, I think that it's that kind of sense of responsibility that they have, that they've been given so much, talent and, success, that they now have a responsibility to do something. And they do. And I admire them for that. And I wish they were here. I wish they were still here.
I think as theatre scholars and Miller scholars, both Kiran and I are very appreciative of the kind of essays Miller wrote. And, it adds to our understanding of the works, but also we get to know a lot about the playwrights as people. Because obviously we get to know a lot through their plays as well, through their creative works, but the kind of explanation and I love the fact that they are very political in their essays.
Mm-hmm.
So, because that can be quite subtle and indirect in the play, but in the essay, in the speech, it's direct.
No doubt.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. Changing tax slightly here, and we'll circle back to Pinter. In the 1960s, Miller began to travel abroad far more than before, partly because he was a president of International Pen. Can you talk about how that opportunity came about in his life and how it affected him and his work later on?
Well, with Miller, it's his Inga Morath, right? I mean, she was a photographer. She had done a lot of traveling, and she goes to Germany and brings him with her, and they visit a death camp. And he's, I mean, he knows that this has happened, but it's another thing to be there. And I think that affects him greatly, and I think that probably persuaded him that travel was not just maybe Hollywood jet setting, which it must have been like being married to Marilyn Monroe, just jet setting kind of thing. And then now it became, it had that moral purpose. It had that, you know, mission and a way to learn new things and develop new ideas and experiences and have a diversity of experiences that I think really does influence his plays. And, I mean, Pinter going to Israel, Pinter going to Turkey, I mean, on a simple level, it really demonstrates the importance of international travel. And when we cannot do it, what we're losing is this experience of global life. And we can't afford to not have that experience of global life. And I know, right now it's just awful that we can't have that experience. And I'm concerned that we're going to really cut it off because of the pandemic. But their lives are perfect illustrations of the value of travel on a very deep level. So, yeah, I think, and then, how he becomes involved in Penn, I think it's just, again, he's very organized and outspoken and really wants to make a difference. And the same thing with Pinter, only Pinter doesn't want to run an organization. I cannot see Pinter running any organization. I think people would, I think I described Pinter as pugilistic. And I think that, he's like a boxer, and which I like, and I think makes him a really interesting writer and thinker, but probably a horrible boss. So
now that you've said that, because I always find the writer most associated with pugilistic is Norman Mailer. So I'd be really curious if there's any crossover between the two.
I think so. I do. You said that, and that resonates with me. I can see that. And it's funny, we're talking about pugilism. Ken Burns has just released an amazing documentary about Muhammad Ali. And it was just fun to see Norman Mailer at one of these fights, surrounded by people and women. And there he was. And I think that, Pinter was very supportive of many radical groups. I know I organized a conference on Pinter in London, and I'm trying to remember the name of the, but it was an alternative newspaper, and they just admired him so much because he was so supportive of their work, and he was just very supportive of other writers and thinkers, and so I think he was better off that way, working that way. But I think Penn has really got to be a really challenging corporation organization. There's always something going on that you need to deal with and raise money and things like that. That's a lot of work. Really a lot of work. Especially
the way Miller did it when he was so sort of active and traveled so much and wrote so many letters. But in many ways, I think to me, it seems that traveling with Penn made him more cynical in a lot of ways about life on both sides of the Iron Curtain, which I think is where we get a play like The Archbishop's Ceiling, which is not about how terrible life behind the Iron Curtain and how great life in America is.
Right.
So I just wondered, does this contribute to the increased irony and even cynicism in his works, which we can interpret in many ways as the influence of absurdism, but which might not necessarily be that?
I would think so. I mean, it's impossible to imagine what, things that they saw not affecting them, and you see, somebody like Sarah Kane, her response to these things, and then, Miller and Pinter, getting a little more political, or, Pinter getting more political. So I can imagine that it does. I mean, it's just disheartening. But at the same time, I think that as long as you're a writer, you are optimistic, because otherwise you're not a writer. If you don't think that what you're writing is going to do something, then why write? So I think that as a writer, you're an outsider and maybe a sort of optimist, maybe not quite optimistic, but there's a hope there that what you write is going to make a difference. So, but I really would have no idea. I think sometimes it's really hard to know. You think about things that happen to you and how they affect you immediately, and then how they affect you later. And it's just sometimes difficult to point to something that, like, I mean, it seems easy to point to the women in these writers' lives as making a huge difference in their lives. And, but, whether or not seeing the torture, etc., made him write differently or more vehemently, maybe. I mean, just seems like they're sensitive. It must.
Your answer does make me think about the similarities between Inge and Antonia. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking it right now. But like your last answer also, in your last answer, you started with, Miller traveling for pen, but also the fact that he was married to Inge Morat, and, she being a photographer, and travel being for exploration other than just jet setting.
Right.
So would you just elaborate a little bit about how similar the two women would be, like, because
I think
they did influence the writers.
You're absolutely right. They're both writers. They're both artists. They have their own, world. They have their own careers. During the Pinter conference that I hosted, I said, what am I going to do about Lady Antonia? And someone told me, oh, they respect one another's, activities. So this is his. She's just going to wait in the background. She's just going to be with him, but not, it's not going to be both of them together. This is his event, etc. So they had worked it out, how to work together. And apparently Morath and Miller did too, because she was very productive. And I think, I think that having that independent, in a marriage is very healthy. And so I think that probably helped. And they're both artists. They're both, the outsider looking in. They're both experiencing rejection, criticism, the press. They both have experiences with that, and appear to have better coping skills than Monroe did with that. And that probably helped quite a bit too. But yeah, I can't, I just am grateful, that I am married to someone who also has a career, and we both are obsessed with them, and we can leave them, but also come together. And I think that works out. And I do think it helped their marriages and their art, because I think for Pinter, Vivian was a disaster. Vivian Merchant was just careening to destruction. And with Lady Antonia, there was a stability there. She had her children. She welcomes him into her family. And they, it's just such a nice, stable environment that helps him write. And whereas with Vivian, it was drama. Yeah. And the same with Monroe, it was drama.
Too much drama for the dramatists.
Too many actresses. Clearly.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're giving actresses a bad name now.
That's what I was thinking.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't even want to know about the female writers who marry male actors. That must be the worst of both worlds.
It's just saying that it doesn't work. The writer and the actor cannot be. Yeah. So Miller is often considered the quintessential American playwright, addressing the concerns of the nation directly. How much does his work with pen complicate this view?
Yeah, and I think the popularity of his work, as we were talking about earlier, that it's universal. It's been shown, everywhere, and performed everywhere. How shocking was it that Death of a Salesman was a huge success in China? Nobody expected this to work, and it did, and it was a huge success. So I think that, he is an American writer, but he's got universal and global appeal. And I'm sure his experiences with pen, may have given him different perspectives later, and he incorporated them. But I think from the beginning, he was writing for the world, not just for the United States. And, maybe some of these issues that we address here in the United States are as important in other countries as well. And again, because we share our arts, we realize, hey, there is a lot more we have in common than we thought.
Yeah, I think it's often funny. Ambika, this might be slightly similar from an Indian context, but in Ireland, we spend a lot of time looking at both what happens in the UK and in America. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, growing up, my mum living in Dublin, she had the English channels. In the countryside, you wouldn't have had the English channels.
Right.
And that kind of still happens now. We all have the English channels on TV, music, TV, films, but it doesn't kind of quite work the opposite way. So it sometimes feels there's this real sort of lack of understanding because we know so much more about what happens in the UK, and we follow sort of America quite closely as well. That they are just kind of cultural dominance. So yeah, it does feel that almost anything that happens there just almost automatically spreads out.
No, that's true.
Yeah,
unfortunately, unfortunately, it is true. I think the pandemic may be helping. I've been noticing a lot more foreign offerings on some of the streaming channels that we have here. I just finished a Czechoslovakian sort of mystery called Signs. I was watching the Netflix. There's been a couple just Somali things that I've seen. I just watched an Iranian vampire movie called She Walks at Night that was actually filmed in the United States, but it's set in Iran. And so I think people were just hungry for film and series. So suddenly there's a market for foreign things because we were going through so much other entertainment options. So maybe we'll see more from other countries.
In India, because so you talking about your mom watching more of English channels on TV, but it's been weird here because I grew up watching a lot of American shows translated to Hindi, and that was the television that I watched, and less from the UK, more from America. But we were under the British rule for over 200 years. So.
Maybe that was a form of revolution. They're not going to watch the British television.
I don't know, but nobody hates the British here.
Nobody hates the British here.
Nobody hates them. We are kind of fond of them as well. We like them. So.
But I want to talk though about and kind of going back to their visit in Turkey, the visit to Turkey. I think Pinter's play Mountain Language was kind of quite obviously inspired by his time, and I think we can see some of the interest in totalitarianism that we see in some of Miller's later work, like Resurrection Blues. But of their visit, the Turkish author and politician, and I will butcher the name, I do apologize, Nazli Ilichak, with whom Pinter argued loudly at the dinner, said it was a kind of Orientalism. They were just looking for some material to write about. What's your take on this criticism?
I can understand it. Anytime, sort of the dominant culture uses non-dominant culture, there's tension. and you worry about tokenism, or I don't know, maybe trying to capitalize on a popular liberal, and Pinter was criticized for that he was just jumping on the bandwagon for, publicity. And I think that anytime you're going to speak out or for someone, it's always a rough road. And, you have to make a decision. Am I going to be intimidated by the criticism? And am I going to risk making a huge mistake and misstepping and actually undoing things that I want to help? We are struggling with that here in Kentucky and the United States over the African American civil rights and things like that. We want to be a white ally, but at the same time, we don't want to speak for people. We want to help people speak for themselves and, get out of the way kind of thing. So it's very complicated, but I can say, for both Miller and Pinter, I don't think so at all. I think they are both very passionate about social justice issues, and maybe they misstep and they get it wrong, but their motives are good. And I don't think mountain language was, Orientalism or anything, because it could be set anywhere. I saw the Beckett shorts in London, the first installment with Jamie Lloyd's theater. And the first installment was all political. Just it began and ended, the first half of the first installment was political. And they did American football, and they did the prez and the officer, and they did precisely. And it was just this barrage of anger at injustice. And it was a tsunami of anger at injustice. And, that was real. Whether it was perfectly nuanced in a politically correct way, I don't know, but you couldn't ignore it. And I wish they had brought that to the United States, to see the anger at what we have done as an America that is a bully. And Miller too. He's critical of America. He's trying to show, how we can get better. And, people say he's dogmatic, he's a propagandist. And, I don't think that at all. I think he's, passionate. And people need to be passionate. And if they misstep, we've got to forgive them and move on. Because otherwise people aren't going to say anything. People are going to say, well, the heck with it. Yeah, I don't think they deserve that criticism. I think they deserve our applause.
They sure do. And both of them wrote plays which were concerned with safeguarding the dignity of the individual in relation to, and also a kind of confrontation with social power structures that we saw in their plays. So do you see this as one of the chief reasons for their mutual appreciation of each other and encouragement of each other's works and social political engagement?
I would think so. I would love to be a fly on the wall at a dinner, And I tried to get Lady Antonia to talk about it at one point. I said, well, what did he think of Miller? What did you, he really respected Miller. And then we moved on to something else. She didn't, I don't know. She didn't want she didn't want to go on record, I guess,
fair.
So, and that's fair, because I do think that, I know Miller's papers have been shared with the Ransom Center in Texas, and then, Pinter's papers are in the British Library, and, anybody can go and see them. But I do think there's I don't know, either edited collection of his papers or letters or something in the works. And so some things are not being released, or, because I think I do. I get that feeling. No one said anything, but I get that feeling they're saving some things, for release at a later date. So.
Oh, that's fascinating. Let's really watch this space.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see what pops up.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're very protective of the rights on things, and that's their right. So.
Absolutely. And look, we're going to wrap up with the last question. This is a question that kind of brings together some of the themes we've been talking about. How would you assess the relationship between American and European playwrights, both historically and contemporaneously? Is there a sense of distrust? Yeah, I know. Sorry, we like to close on the big ones, but take it in whatever direction you like. Is there a distrust? Is there a misunderstanding? I'm really curious about how the two relate to each other and think about each other.
Well, I just finished this paper on Václav Havel and censorship and the theater of the absurd, and I thought it was going to do more with Beckett and Pinter involved, and I just ended up just getting sucked into Havel and his work, and it's fascinating. And at least with his situation when he was in prison, I mean, the global community came together and supported him and put a lot of pressure on the Czechoslovakian communists to release this guy, and they did. Fairly soon after this night of Václav Havel, where Beckett wrote Catastrophe and Pinter did something. I don't remember what he did, but anyway, but he was very supportive. So I think that in the past, playwrights have gotten together and put pressure on, political oppression. I think that I am concerned about the consumer capitalist, late capitalism that's going on, that it just becomes so much about money and so much about, I saw this Lucy Preble piece in London, Enron, fascinating, brilliant. I loved it. Comes to New York, fails, just fails. And I'm really concerned about that because Americans are really not good at taking risks on theater. And I think Europeans are, and I think that a lot of really interesting stuff is coming out of Europe and not so much in the United States because of that financial, concern. But I'm hoping that more smaller theaters will encourage playwriting, and you've got to do a lot of bad plays before you get good ones. And you have to really just say, okay, we're going to have a few really, maybe a lot of bad ones, and then we're going to get some good ones and take that risk. So maybe I'm idealizing, but I see Europe as taking more risks and willing to experiment a little more than the United States. And right now it's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking. We have a theater here, Actors Theater in Louisville, that used to have a new play festival, a new play festival, and they're having to cut it back. It's really heartbreaking. Part of it's COVID, but part of it's just corporations aren't investing in theater anymore. So we have to figure out a new way to experiment in the United States, I think.
It is funny when you read the Miller critiques of kind of commercial theater, kind of as far back as the 70s and the 80s. And it's kind of like, well, wow, it's a good thing he's not around to see what's going on now. He'd be really, really horrified by it.
Absolutely. And he was brutalized. And, Pinter was brutalized too when he first came out, and it's just, I don't know. I just think if we're going to do this, we have to be more, supportive. And, everybody's going to have a clunker, if not 5 or more.
Yeah, definitely. Ambika, have you got anything else?
Nope. I think we have had a very good discussion today, and we'll just wrap it here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Nancy Hall, that's great. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll speak to you again.
You're welcome. It was delightful. I hope to meet you in person sometime.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Anne. It was such a pleasure to have you. And I got to know so much more about Miller and Pinter through you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that was our interview with Anne C. Hall. Ambika, what did you think?
It was great, Kieran. It was an absolute delight to hear Anne's interpretations of Pinter and Miller's plays. I really loved the way she threw light on their likenesses and her reiteration of the need to see beyond stereotypical judgments we might be tempted to make about their work.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting as well to hear more about Pinter's life, about his movement towards explicitly political activity and writing, and then the way in which their relationship developed throughout their work with pen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all we have for today's episode. You can listen to the Arthur Miller Society podcast on Spotify or Google us to find the player that works best for you. Don't forget to follow the Arthur Miller Society on Facebook and Twitter. We'll speak to you again soon, far sooner than we did after the last episode.
Thanks for listening. Take care.